Hey, hello, hello.
Hey, how's it going? Can you hear me, see me?
Yeah, how's it going? What's up? Do
Doing
you want to
good.
introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Socrates TV, stream on Twitch. Not now, at the moment, obviously. I'm a scientist by day, interested in philosophy, politics. Started streaming a few years ago, around the same time as Prime Kai. Got Wick into streaming. So yeah.
All right, well, cool. And then yeah, what are we chatting about?
Yeah, so I had a few disagreements with some of your takes on the Israel-Palestine conflict. I think the latest that I can think of was I was watching one of your streams and you talked about referring to Israel as an apartheid state as cringe and that it's just a dog whistle for one state, which I see where you're coming from. That you're saying like it's uh, if it's an apartheid state, then we should make it a non-apartheid state. But I don't think it has to be that. It could be two non-apartheid states as a result. And um,
Yeah, I don't disagree with that, but
yeah,
I think that the issue is that like the you don't ever solve the apartheid stuff without solving the state stuff. That's why I think it's a worthless argument, or it doesn't even make sense to bring it up. Like there's no solving the apartheidness of it without solving the borders of it. And if they got like, say for instance, there was a two-state solution, we probably wouldn't really be talking about apartheid anymore because it'd be two separate nations, right?
yeah. I guess if it's it can be fully autonomous. I can imagine there could be two states, and still Israel could have like a massive level of not letting the Palestinian state have security forces, not letting them have kind of full autonomy. But even just going back to, I mean, I think there's a reason that people talk about Israel being an apartheid state, is that there's something morally wrong with how it's proceeding, and for whatever you consider like the moral loading of apartheid, I think it's pretty accurate to call Israel that, or at least the people who can make that call, like Archbishop Desmond Tutu, people in South Africa, B'Tselem in Israel, Ehud Barak, former PM of Israel. Um, for those people to
Yeah,
make
but
that
like I
call,
guess like the question is like, do you think the apartheidness ever changes without like a change in status between the two territories? Like,
um,
do you think that the apartheid is going to end while it's still under military occupation?
I think it's pretty unlikely. It could go like up or down, right? If
Well, let's be yeah. I mean, like, let's
yeah,
seriously though. Like when we say pretty unlikely, give me a percentage because in my mind it's like one
it's
percent
like
or less.
yeah,
Like
it'd
yeah.
be I would say five. So yeah, same
Okay,
same
one
ballpark.
out of 20 chance that Israel grants full rights and full autonomy to everybody within the Palestinian territories without a formal agreement being set out for what the borders would look like.
Well, it's things like the checkpoints, like being able to build without permits. I think there's a lot that could theoretically change. The likelihood is low. I would agree.
Okay. Um. Yeah. What about well, yeah. What else do you want to talk about that? I guess. I
Yeah.
guess in my mind, I
Mhm.
guess I see that like obviously there are double standards between how the people are treated, but I feel like that's a function more of the military occupation than like Israel genuinely wanting to oppress like a certain race of people. That's
Mm.
what, or a certain nationality of people, and that if the borders got situated like in a two-state solution or something, I feel like if even if there was like apartheid conditions afterwards, it would be way easier to attack Israel on that foundation and then force some kind of like dramatic change. But right now, it's like literally military borders. It's hard to make any arguments about what the situation should look like, I think.
Yeah. I mean, so there's this question kind of this is what often comes up as the heart of the conflict of, is Israel trying to drive Palestinians off the land, or are they just defending themselves? And it seems like people come kind of really hardline one direction or another. I don't know how much you've looked at like the early history, kind of Nakba era. I know that you've been like quickly getting up to date with the whole history.
I'd say I'm decently familiar. What part of it do you want to talk about?
Yeah, I mean, um, this question of um, does Israel want to basically subjugate and drive away Palestinians?
Hmm.
I think it seems clear that at least some there's some factor within whatever you want to call it, the kind of early founding of Israel, Zionism, the continued kind of state actions of Israel, that there's at least some element of that. There's some recognition that there are people living on the land, that they would need to leave in some way, and then the way that a lot of Palestinians were driven off was through a lot of violence. And so I think it's reasonable to have that kind of suspicion, at least, that there's still an element of that in play.
Sure. I mean, I would say having a suspicion of it, I think, is 1,000,000,000% reasonable. Just by looking at the foundation of how Israel started. Obviously, the 47 to 49, the civil war, the actual war, the Nakba, the driving off of all the Arabs. I think is super fair to have that suspicion for sure.
Yeah, so
Yeah, I don't know how
that's
much. Yeah, go ahead.
so that's like this is a double standard that I've seen applied when it comes to looking at Hamas or different Palestinian groups versus Israel itself. That I've heard this. I heard this when I talked to Wick, that he was like, "Oh, Hamas showed us what they've always wanted to do. They've always wanted to come in and kill as many Israelis as possible. But with Israel, when they engage in things like that, it's seen as like, okay, well, maybe they did this one thing at this one time, but this isn't really who they are." I don't know. What
Do you think that if
about arguments
Hamas
like
had
that?
the same level of military capability as Israel, what do you think it would look like?
Yeah, I mean that's a fair question. I think they would probably just annihilate Israel. I think they would
Yeah,
kill like
I think that Hamas
yeah.
having it in their founding charter, I think that a lot of the other Palestinian organizations, the Islamic jihadists, the early PLO groups, the Palestinian Liberation People's Front, or like all these other groups that have all engaged in like terrorist attacks in Israel, across the world. There was that Berlin massacre of the athletes. There was Black September hijacking planes all over the world. Yeah, I understand that the IDF has committed massacres and slaughtering civilians, sometimes without good provocation, I would say. Obviously, Israel sometimes argues in this, like,
Sure.
the requirement for dramatic reprisals or whatever. But despite the crimes of the IDF, which I would say are pretty undeniable, despite the crimes, there still does seem to be a difference on the two sides. My general feeling, oh, I'm sorry, it was Munich, not Berlin. Whatever, same shit. My feeling when I walk away from all of it is it's kind of that it's a Mimi quote, and I hate Mimi quotes, but it really does feel true that if the Palestinians put down their guns, there would be some kind of peace, some kind of two-state solution. If Israel put down their guns, the whole country would be annihilated. Yeah, and I feel like when I look at the online rhetoric, the only solution that people seem to be happy with is a one state. Nobody on the left, nobody with a Palestinian
Yeah.
flag is pushing two state. Everybody's pushing one state. And then when I look at the history of the Palestinians, especially with Arafat, when it comes to negotiating peace, it seemed like the two-state solution was also not very good. When you couple that with the Lebanon war in '82, when you couple that with Israel, retreating from some territories, it feels like the general vibe or mood with a lot of the Palestinians is fuck it, fuck peace, fuck two-state. We need you to just fight, 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 fight until we get our whole country back. And that's never happening. The one state thing it's never going to happen. Israel won't let it happen, at least. I mean, it could happen if Israel's destroyed or enough people die, I
Yeah.
guess. But like we're talking on a scale of like probably hundreds of thousands for this to
Sure.
be considered. Yeah.
Yeah. So just going through those one by one. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah. Oh,
there's
sorry. If I say something you disagree, just cut me off immediately.
Oh,
But
sure.
go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah, I don't. I'm not personally on Twitter, so I don't know kind of what the rhetoric is like from lefties on Twitter. But I think that there's a pretty sizable number of lefty people historically, and I hope currently, who are looking at two-state solutions. It's
Sure.
it would be
My
really stupid to say
understanding.
only like one state is.
Sure. Yeah.
That's a meme answer. Yeah.
My understanding, and I could be wrong on this, so we could go dig through it real quick if you have it or if you don't believe me. I think there was polling done prior to October 7th that it looked like something like, I want to say like 33% of Palestinians or whatever would be okay with a two-state solution, and then it was like another 30% would be okay with it, but they still wanted to continue violent resistance until they got the one-state solution. So I'm pretty
Sure.
sure even when you poll the Palestinian people, a majority of the Palestinians also want a one-state solution, and then a lot of
Okay.
those people also seem to be supporting violent means to do so. Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, I know historically, I haven't looked at like more recent polling data, but I know historically two state has been the favored solution for Palestinians. But if that's changed, that's probably unfortunate because that's the less realistic one. Um, yeah, that's a lot less likely to
Hmm.
happen. That's something I can come on and just say. Yeah, I was listening to when you're talking to Ethan and Hassan talking, and Hassan was saying the U.S. could pressure Israel into letting go of their borders. That was really fucking stupid. That makes no sense.
Hmm.
Israel is not 100% self-sufficient, but their military is pretty strong. Their economy is reasonably strong. There's a lot of biotech there. I think the most that we could kind of pressure for as the United States, as take this opportunity to say, hey, um, we're not going to send these like big military packages or continue military funding until you put something in writing or law or whatever that you stop the settlements. What do you think about that? I know that's kind of a contentious, like at this moment, to make a stand like that. How do you feel about that kind of thing?
Um, Personally, based on all the reading I've done so far, I have found absolutely no justification whatsoever for settlements in the West Bank. It seems like it
Mm-hmm.
literally makes life worse for everybody. In my opinion, no, not in my opinion. This is something I haven't done any research on. I need to do a little bit more on. I've heard this said, and I hate repeating these I've heard said because I don't trust any bullshit that I hear about the situation like reading it myself because everybody fucking lies about it. But one thing that I've heard repeated a lot is that one of the reasons why the attack from the Gaza Strip was so successful is because so much of the IDF was wasting their time dicking around defending settlers and doing autistic shit on the
Mm-hmm.
West Bank, which is
Yeah.
the if like it's just the most unbelievably fucking stupid thing in the world. So yeah, personally, like all the enclaves, like places near like Hebron and all that shit, I think should be fucking wiped off the map. All of the fucking even near the Green Line, I think all those settlements should be wiped off. I don't know. I think all the settlements in the West Bank are beyond fucking stupid. That's my opinion for it. I don't know what the justification is. At the very least, there should be some sort of like no more settlements, no more
Yep.
expansion, no more building in those settlements. I think it's fucking wild. But yeah, but yeah, I've
Yeah.
never heard a good justification for that.
And there are, so I don't remember if it was in Resolution 242 or another one, but one of those
Hmm.
resolutions actually had a method for creating two states despite the kind of balkanization of the West Bank that's been the result of the settlements, which is that you do some kind of land swaps. So even though you can't
Yeah,
give like the
resolution
exact,
two. Oh
yeah,
god.
well, just even though you can't give back the exact like original borders, you kind of even out the area.
Yeah, there have been different. Resolution 242, I believe, was just the UN resolution calling upon a recognition of the Israeli and Palestinian state. I think Resolution 242 came in. Was it right after 48, um, or was it right after
No,
the Six Day War?
yeah, it was after the Six
No, it
Day
was right
War.
after the Six Day War. Okay,
Yeah.
yeah. However, part of this Resolution 242, I think, was also requiring all of the Arab states to recognize Israel as an official
Hmm.
country, which they don't want to do either. Um, yeah,
Yeah.
but
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's a messy situation.
mhm.
Um, okay, I'm trying to think if there are other. So it's unfortunate if most Palestinians want to go for one state. That's not very likely. I don't know. I don't know if there's any kind of like functional, legitimate plans for one state, what that could look like, because historically Israel has always been against that because you can't really have like a total um, total democracy with massive um, kind of demographic inequalities toward the Arab or toward the Muslim side and still have like a Jewish state. So that's I think you're correct in saying that for Israelis, having a one state that includes Palestinians and especially like full Palestinian right of return would
Mhm.
be the end of what they conceive of Israel. And I don't think
Mhm.
that Israel should be forced to do that. As a lefty, I'm saying I don't think that.
Mhm.
Um, but have you looked into what other kind of conceptions of one state could be, like what any like non dumb
I've never seen any
plan for
good
that?
because the thing about one state is one state almost certainly implies an infinite right of return. And
Mm-hmm.
because of the bizarre fucking way that Palestinian refugees are treated, that's like 5 million plus people that would be
Mm-hmm.
flooding back into Israel. That, yeah, and yeah. And then from there, I don't think any person in good faith would say that like there wouldn't be a massive amount of violence ensuing from that situation. So
Hmm.
yeah, I've never heard any like one state solution that sounds like it would be workable. Um, yeah.
Yeah. Have you thought about or talked to people or heard any good kind of arguments or ideas about what things could look like moving forward? It seems like there should be, there should be probably some right of return, and there probably would need to be some right of return for Palestinians to be remotely satisfied. Maybe that could be limited to like the actual people who are kicked out or one generation later or something, so that
I
it's
totally
fewer people.
I don't agree with right of return at all, actually. I think it's a really weird concept. I don't know if right of return like that has been implemented in any other way, size, shape, or form, like in any other type of
Well,
state.
wait, I
Um,
mean,
mhm.
Israel has a right of return that's extended to like all Jews everywhere. So like I could move to Israel. I'm Jewish. I could move to Israel and get Israeli citizenship just because I'm Jewish.
Yeah, but the Israeli right of return is kind of like a meme, right? You're not like really going back to where you were kicked out. That's just what they call their program, basically, to recruit Jewish people from all over the world to come and like make Israel the strongest Jew country or whatever, right?
Sure. I mean,
But the
there's a decent. I don't know if it's whatever,
mhm.
8%, 10%, whatever. Significant voting blocks in Israel that consider literally
Mhm.
like, oh, 2,000 years ago we were here.
No, yeah, I
You know,
understand. I'm just saying that that's like a meme right of return. For the
mhm,
Palestinian right of return, the international argument there is that Palestinians have a right to go back to the land that they were expelled from.
yeah.
But I feel like it's a bit unique in that case because generally, when you talk about a right of a refugee to return to a place that they were unsettled from,
Hmm.
we don't typically internationally fight for the right to them to go back to exactly the old house that they had, which was really strange. Whereas it feels like when Palestinians talk about right of return, they're not talking about going back to any part of historic Palestine. They explicitly want to go inside the borders of Israel, which is, I think, kind of weird. Because I don't like if you
Sure.
got expelled from Russia at some point, I don't think that an international right of return or an international right to be resettled back in your homeland is like you get to go back to exactly your neighborhood. Like I don't even know what that would look like.
Mm.
It seems kind of bizarre. Um,
Have you seen some kind of polling on like how strong that sentiment is that it's like I want to go to like my exact village, my exact city area versus
well,
like generally like if they were like, okay, we could go to the West Bank, we could go to like somewhere within Gaza, like we'd be okay with that. It could be
Yeah, I
difficult
don't
polling,
think
I
the
don't know.
problem is this is going to sound mean, or this will be my more radical takes, I guess. Is I think the right of return is just a way to fight the state of Israel. I think the whole
Hmm.
thrust of the Palestinian refugee argument is just like an extended way. It's a vector through which to fight Israel. I don't think much of it is done for like valid or legitimate humanitarian reasons. It's just to maintain the struggle until the one
Wait,
state solution
so
can be realized. Yeah.
sorry, sorry.
Hmm.
You said to interrupt. So,
No, you're good. Yeah.
um, yeah. What do you base that on, or where do you? I'm not saying that you're necessarily wrong, but okay. I do think that you're wrong. I do think
Mhm.
that legitimately, um, Palestinians care really, really strongly about their homeland. There's like, a group of people that I think have had like not so much kind of movement around the Middle East, but have been like living kind of in these like small villages, and it's like the idea of having to move across the world and like being able to return home is a really big deal for them.
Yeah, but I think it's like more of a big deal for them than it probably should be, or I think the way that it's expressed is like really cancerous. So, for instance, the UNRWA, the part of the UN that handles Palestinian refugee, there's two huge things that I have a big problem with. One is that the UNRWA never attempts to resettle refugees. It's literally not a part of their mandate. They have no desire, no goal. It's not part of what they do is to resettle refugees. So you've already got a refugee body of the UN that doesn't resettle anybody, that's already kind of weird. And then the second part of that is the Arab League, when they passed Resolution 1547, they explicitly said, we are not giving citizenship to any Palestinian ever
Mm-hmm.
because we want them to be able to fight for their homeland. So what you wind up is a group of people that are never attempted to be resettled, and then the vast majority of them go to places where they're refugees. You've got people like Lebanon, Syria, all these people like, oh, we've taken hundreds of thousands of Palestinian refugees. Not really. They keep them in camps at the end of their territory. They don't issue them passports or citizenship. They never try to make them a part of this is the actual apartheid. They will indefinitely keep them there with no goal of integrating, no goal of giving passports, no goal of anything. And it's explicitly their stated goal to never do that so that they can maintain their territorial struggle against Israel. I
Mm-hmm.
think those two things are really fucking weird.
So,
Because now instead of
uh,
Palestinians like ever attempting to be resettled, yeah, they're just like kept as like a tool to continue fighting with Israel. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
yes, so I think there's kind of there's there's like two different things. So other
Hmm.
Arab countries that hate Israel, I think absolutely can and do use Palestinians as kind of pawns within that struggle. How much do Egyptians personally or kind of politically like truly care about Palestinians versus, I mean, I guess Egypt doesn't hate Israel that much, but other Arab countries, Iran obviously. Um, so I think there are other Arab nations that I'm sure do that in order to put pressure onto Israel and to make things more difficult for Israel. But that's different than saying that all Palestinians themselves are just like, trying to be inconvenient with where they want to live to try to destroy Israel. I think that's like um, a much more radical, much further claim. I think I could be with you
Maybe.
on like other Arab countries, but I don't know about Palestinians
Maybe it might not
themselves.
be the Palestinians themselves, but I mean, it does feel like there's a goal for. It does feel like the fight against Israel is an important one. Like, here's a question. Actually, I don't know the answers. I just thought of
Mm-hmm.
this actually this morning. Um, so you're familiar with like the first war in '48, right?
Yeah.
So in '48, Hussein captured up to all the West Bank, right, on its way to Israel, and was Nasser the leader in Egypt in '48, and then Egypt captured all of the Sinai, and they
Mm-hmm.
captured or they already had the Sinai. They captured the Gaza Strip. Were any Palestinians talking about like freedom from Egyptian occupation, or were they talking about freedom from Jordanian occupation in the Gaza Strip of the West Bank from '48 to '67? Why was there a 20-year period there where no Palestinian nation was even attempted to be conceived of or formed?
That's a good question. I would have to look into it. If I were to speculate, I would say that the Palestinians living there probably didn't consider Jordanians or Egyptians as like foreign, as the people who are moving there explicitly to form like a new Jewish state. Which,
Sure.
again, like,
I would be really
um,
careful with that argument, though. I agree with you
mhm,
there, but I think that furthers the argument that like the Palestinian people there didn't really consider themselves like a nation of Palestinians.
mhm.
They were all just kind of like part of the smattering of Arabs that existed in the East in the Near East, the Middle East
Sure.
at the time,
It's
right?
also,
Yeah.
you've got to be a little bit careful about some of these in some areas. So this is like after this is like during and after World War II. There were more parts of the world that were
Hmm.
starting to consider or want to be countries versus just kind of like parts of
Hmm.
kingdoms or different areas. So I
I
think
agree.
some of that may have shifted like sentiment, or they were seeing other people be like, oh hey, we want to be a country. We
Yeah.
want to be a
I
country
think it
too.
happened with Syria. It happened with Iraq. It happened because
Mm-hmm.
these guys all had their little fights and made their countries basically after the British and everything. Yeah. Yeah, I
Yeah.
don't disagree. Yeah. I only say that because a lot of people say that, like, oh, well, the Palestinian people conceived of themselves as a nation for hundreds and hundreds of years. But it's just strange to me that
Yeah, I'm not sure
for
how
20 years,
much
Egypt
that's.
occupied the Gaza Strip, Jordan occupied the West Bank. I don't recall hearing anybody fight for, yeah.
Hmm. Um, but yeah, I mean, that was also kind of occupation in service of driving out somebody who was trying to form a new nation there.
I
So,
agree. But
so
again, that's my argument
yeah.
that it feels like they're more concerned with driving Israel out than anything having to do with the Palestinians.
I mean, so there's okay. So I'll be upfront that there's definitely like two forces at work. I think they're
Hmm.
absolutely, or okay, I'll say three forces. There's some
Hmm.
level of anti-Semitism in the Middle East, absolutely. Um, Lefties who say that's not in play at all, or just, yeah, that's absolutely in play.
Sure.
The other thing is that this is like people moving from other parts of the world who are non-Arabs, who are moving and who are like forming this new nation. And then the third really important portion of that is the Nakba itself. So the um, it's those Israelis or kind of like people coming together to form Israel who are already even buying up land. I'm not sure how much of like a provocation that was already seen before even like the attacking villages and like marching people, into the deserts and stuff.
Hmm.
I would have to review the kind of like micro history.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, the purchase of land was a huge deal.
mhm.
Um, what was the first, the Surstock, I think, was like the largest purchase or whatever. They got most of it. Like when they were buying the land, after they bought the land, they were
Yeah.
evicting like Arab tenant farmers essentially off the land afterwards. Like, yeah, I think that was a really big deal for why people felt super ass mad early on. And probably
Yeah.
fair to feel super ass mad about it. Yeah.
Yeah.
In all of the reading I've done of this, sometimes to the frustration of my chat, I actually don't even factor in like the anti-Semitic stuff that much. I'm sure there is like part of it. I think it's like, especially today, I think there's probably more of like the anti-Semitic or the whatever stuff. But yeah, early on, I just kind of view it all as like a geopolitical conflict. I don't know how
Yeah.
much the anti-Semitism played into it. I think, like you said, even though there was violence against Jews across the Ottoman Empire, the Palestinian Arabs and the Jewish Arabs seemed to chill more with each other before. Like you said, it was the outsiders, it was the European Jews coming
Yep.
in that I think was really triggering the fuck out of them. Yeah.
It was like Holocaust survivors, people from Russia, people who were fleeing pogroms. So it's like people, maybe with like a good reason to leave and search for new land, but they were seen as like total outsiders because they weren't even from the Middle East.
Yeah.
I don't know how much kind of religion versus I would imagine just geography was like probably an even bigger factor. Um, Shoot. Oh yeah. I was gonna ask about, so in terms of like the reading that you've been doing. I don't know if you've looked at any of Norman Finkelstein's books. I'm not saying you have to read like a whole book on stream, but there are like specific chapters. I read a lot of Image and Reality of the Palestinian conflict. I could send you like a ebook and like a chapter. If you just looked at like probably like 20 pages or something, you could look at for whatever you think of Norman Finkelstein. He's like a legitimate academic and historian, and like when he makes arguments, they're sourced and they're cited, and so you can say, okay, well, I disagree with him because of this, but he's not just like randomly saying shit.
Yeah, if you've got like specific arguments you want to throw me, that's fine. I've dug through a few footnotes and sourcings from Finkelstein's stuff. Just in the little bit that I've seen, I would consider him a dog shit historian.
Okay.
But that could just be my particular opinion. I've also seen a lot of other opinions he has on things. I've Unless there's where he talks about it more, like I think that his opinions on the 6 Day War are entirely ahistorical and ridiculous. And then his juxtaposition of that with like his justifying Russia's invasion of Ukraine, I think is like fucking insane.
Oh God, did he do that?
Yeah, he did. His like saying he had no sympathy for the Charlie Hebdo people that got assassinated by Muslim gunmen for the Muhammad comics, I thought was fucking insane.
Yeah,
But
that's
it
fucked
might
up.
be that there's like really good Finkelstein work that I just haven't read yet. But the little bit, because I know I argued with that guy called Mouthy Infidel, and he was sourcing me some Finkelstein stuff and I felt like the way that he was utilizing footnotes was not very honest. But
Okay.
yeah, but I don't know if there's a particular passage or something you want to bring up, or if there's a particular point that you think he raises that's good. I mean, we can talk about it if you want.
Yeah, I don't have that offhand, but I can find it for you and send it over.
Yeah, sure.
Because he talks about like some of those kind of early Zionist leaders thinking about like what were things going to look like as they formed the country, and some of them were recognizing they would have to like get Palestinians, some number of Palestinians off of that land somehow. And
Yeah, maybe I have a really
obviously
hard
they
time
weren't
with
saying,
this.
"Oh, therefore we have to genocide them," but like they're
Well, I mean, because
recognizing that.
there's one of the most popular things that comes up was this quote. I think Ilan Pape, I think, was the first historian to bring up this quote. It's this Ben Gurion quote from a diary, and there's like some autistic shit because like some of it is like scribbled out. And I think that the way this quote was initially presented made it look like Ben Gurion was talking about like explicitly having to ethnically cleanse or desiring an ethnic cleansing and an expansion of territory, blah blah blah. But the issue that I have is that it's like one quote, and I feel like when you look at a lot of the other quotes that he's made, or if you look at like the Declaration of Israeli Independence, like they do explicitly say in there, we want to build a nation with Arabs, we want to work with Arabs. The mandate, or I'm sorry, the partition plan in 47, when that was initially given, the land that they agreed to would have been 55% Jews and 45% Arabs, a huge Arab population. So I don't know if I buy that quote as much. Maybe that's something I need to dive into more. The only problem is that obviously after 48, like there's so much conflict back and forth that depending on which conflict you pick and choose, like everybody can say, oh, look, like Israel's just trying to grab land. And Israel can say, well, we're being attacked all the time. It's not fair. And it's like this weird back and forth thing to try to figure out like, well, who's actually got the moral authority here, which is really difficult. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a really, I think when you look back across the history of the conflict and what different sides were interested or willing to take as concessions from different times, it shifts really, really rapidly. I don't know if you ever played like dodgeball as a kid, and you would like lead a little bit, and because it's kickball, it's like baseball but with like a big bouncy ball, and they throw it at you and they miss and it goes in the middle of nowhere, then you just keep running. that's kind of how it feels with like Israel, where at first um, they were they were willing to give a lot in terms of territory, but then they got attacked, and they saw how strong militarily they were compared to other nations, and they took a lot of land, and then how far they were willing to go and how far the Palestinians and other Arabs there were willing to go shift
Mhm.
like really, really rapidly as Israel and those other nations got to know how strong they were. So like when six nations, attack, but then Israel kind of like utterly annihilates their armies, they're like, oh,
Mhm.
it's like it's a oh shit moment where they're like, we can go a lot further. What we were willing to accept, what the Palestinians were willing to accept. Obviously, the Palestinians, if they could go back now and
Would take the
accept,
partition
of
plan from
course,
47, of
yeah.
course, and now they want to go back to the 67 borders. And then now, yeah, we're talking about going back to Camp David. But like, I think that's probably part of the frustration of Israel is every time a deal is on the table, there's a no from the other side because they're hoping that they can still eliminate the entire country. And then when
Yeah.
they fail, it's like, okay, well, fuck, can we go back 20 years? And it's like, let's say that they like, let's say, for instance, Israel rejected the 47 partition plan. The Palestinians accepted it. Let's say that Israel, starts a war. What is that going to look like if Israel loses? Do you think that they're going to just section them off in some area, or do you think they're going to literally push them completely out of the continent? Or if Israel would have lost the Six-Day War, what happens? Or if Israel would have lost the Yom Kippur War in 73, what happens? Right? Like in all
Yeah.
of these conflicts, it's probably not going to end where they're like, oh, cool, we've got just the captured territories back. It's chill. It feels like, I mean, I don't even say it feels like the explicit stated goal of people like Nasser were literally like the complete and utter destruction of Israel. It will be a general war. It will be a total war against all the Israelis. So, I mean, yeah.
Yeah, I mean it's a question we can't totally answer now because we don't know. Maybe they'd be like, okay,
Hmm.
now we've captured a bunch of territory back. Now let's negotiate. Now when we can get some kind of like concessions. I don't know what would have happened in those
Sure.
situations, but it's like at every point, to some degree, what people are doing was reasonable. Early on, Israel accepted, yeah, 55-45, and the
Hmm.
Palestinians were like, well, we don't want to give away most of our land. That's insane. These new guys just got here. They're taking stuff over. We're not going to give everything away. But now that they've massively decreased in power, obviously they would go back to that. So it's like at every point, people are doing something that's like kind of reasonable relative to, or want something that's reasonable relative to where they are. But
Hmm.
the level of power of different factions
Leverage they have
leverage
changed. Yeah.
shifted so dramatically over time. And
Yeah.
so I think I think I kind of dislike when people make that as an argument like, wow, the Palestinians had their chance back in 47, 48 to
Hmm.
have their land and they rejected it, and now like for all time going forward, because they underestimated the kind of like military power of Israel, they just like don't get to have land. I'm not saying that you're saying that, but
No, yeah,
I've
I
heard
understand
people
what you're
say that a
saying. Yeah.
ton.
I think the biggest frustration that I have, probably for everything that I've seen, was probably the failure of the Camp David Accords in 2000. I think that was the one chance where what was on the table for Palestinians looked really good, even for the time period. And reportedly, Arafat just walked away from it because he thought that if they did, conquest, that they could basically win, more territory back from Israel. And I feel like that was probably one of the saddest moments. I think it was it the tablet discussions that they talked about where, what were they called? Or it might have been Taba discussions or Taba, but basically, yeah, this was like the closest they'd ever, the Taba summit. This is the closest they'd ever gotten to like penning out an actual territorial agreement, and it just didn't happen. And since then, everything has only gotten worse. But
Yeah. So one thing, I was looking to see if I had it offhand. I could try to find this for you as well. Um, I would be careful when it comes to looking at those peace talks and saying like, oh, it fell through for this reason or that, because I remember having looked into these, and that was like the initial kind of reporting that I saw that was like Arafat walked away. When I looked, it was that they had like underestimated how critical figuring out what was going to happen with Jerusalem was, because
Mhm.
for both sides it's like a really critical
Yeah,
kind of holy site, and they kind of
Jerusalem is
underestimated
definitely,
how big a deal that was.
yeah, Jerusalem is a really big deal for both sides for sure. but like the land negotiations, the land swaps, like at some point, I think that they were talking upwards of like 95% of the territory of like Palestine would have been granted. Like it was higher than what Arafat had even originally wanted. I tried to do more digging into that to see like where the flop came from. I've read that the Jerusalem talks were a bad one, but I've also seen quite a bit of evidence at this point that Arafat was just wanting to fight afterwards anyway, that he was going to use those failed, the Camp David summit failure. He wanted to take that forward and to try to fight with Israel because it was off of Camp David. Remember that the second Intifada happened, which was the incredibly violent one. And the statements from so many different people, even Arafat's wife at the time was saying that Arafat said, listen, you need to stay in France or Germany or wherever you are because shit's about to go down. And that there were purportedly PLO leaders that were saying they were getting messages to be ready to protest and blah, 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 blah. So, yeah, I've seen a lot of statements. I feel like the most favorable thing I've read is that everybody dropped the ball. That's like the most favorable thing I've read. But I feel like in that negotiated position, if anybody's dropping the ball here, it should be like the U.S. and Israel being greedy or horrible. It can't be on Palestinians to drop the ball here. Like it was like such a good deal compared to anything I would have even imagined them getting at the time. Yeah.
Yeah.
But
yeah, it's rough. It's it seems like there's like different focal points that kind of come down to that are easy, like ways that I've seen people kind of excuse how things are from the perspective of like the Palestinians being fucked. That it's like, okay, if it's the case that like Israelis didn't do anything that wrong in 47, 48, then Palestinians attacking them is totally unjustified. If Palestinians kind of passed up really good deals, that's kind of justified whatever's happening to them now. So those are the kind of things that like that I think are really important to dig into to try to understand, and then also step back and think about like, okay, well, if even if Palestinians throughout the last 7 years have not accepted reasonably good deals, and I think I would need to look back into, I think there were some issues. I don't remember with the Camp David Accords or if it was one of these other negotiations. I don't remember how much like right of return was involved within that.
yeah,
Because
in my
I know that was
opinion,
another kind of sticking point that they underestimated.
yeah, I think the crazy one was the at the end of the Taba summit for Camp David. I think they had the thing that was on the table was, I think it was a right of return for up to 100,000 Palestinians back to Israel proper, and then Israel was going to coordinate with international nations, and they were going to contribute to a $30 billion international fund for the resettlement of other Palestinians, which seemed like the most unbelievably amazing deal that they could have ever gotten in regards to that. But again, it all fell through.
Yeah. And the thing to look at that I think, I'm not sure if you'll agree with me, but it seems like as peace talks have fallen through and as Israel has kind of tightened its security and hold, and the settlements have been ongoing, that the violence has increased. So like first Intifada was like not so violent, and I think had like some amount of nonviolent resistance involved, and then the second Intifada was like really violent. And then there was like the March of Return, which was like a totally
I think
non-violent.
well, I
Yeah,
wouldn't
go
say
ahead.
something about it,
Or
but so
yeah,
here's like a thing that I'm not as sure about for the first and second Intifada is, I think Israel had a theory that I think Israel had this theory that the only way they could basically prove themselves is by being incredibly fucking violent. The only way the Arab states would negotiate with them or be serious is for them to be very violent. And I think the issue you run into then is was the first Intifada in 79. First Intifada, I think, was or no, I'm sorry, it was 87 to 93, not
Yeah.
79. That as Israel has kind of like peeled back on their aggression and started signing peace treaties with other states, that it feels like Palestinians don't see the show of force as much anymore. So they're like, well, maybe we should just keep fighting and fighting and fighting until we can get the one state. That's the feeling that I keep getting from all of this, is that the air in the Palestinians' mind, like the atmosphere, is basically just, I think we need to fight for everything, and like no negotiation is acceptable. That's what it feels like they think. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's a possibility that um, that a lot of Palestinians have seen just like so much violence, have seen so little hope of things getting better that they've become more radicalized. I think this is something that um, let me think of how to say this. I think people underestimate how much being in really horrible conditions and feeling like there's no way to change things. So for people in Gaza who have been living, I mean, I think it's been like 18
Hmm.
years that people haven't been able to live, and like half the population I think is like 16 or under. Is that accurate? I don't know if I'm
It's I think it's under, it's 18 or under, but yeah, it's dramatic.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so it's like,
Um,
oh yeah.
but
Oh,
I think I reject this characterization. I understand it's tempting to give it, but like I think that the at this point the Palestinians need to show peace before anything is going to move forward. I don't think that the conditions necessitate 15 years of rockets coming from the Gaza Strip. I don't think I accept that um,
um,
argument at the moment. Yeah, I think because at this rate they're rocketing themselves into the ground figuratively and
sure.
literally. But yeah.
So it might not be um, it might not. So I think the dilemma for people in Gaza is it's like they feel like if they are peaceful. So okay, it's complicated by the fact that there's Hamas and they're
Mhm.
probably not going to be like at all reasonable or kind of modulate their behavior at all. They're just going to keep firing rockets. So that complicates things. But I think for a
Mhm.
lot of people in Gaza, they feel like if they don't do anything, they're in deplorable conditions. There's like very little, food, water, everything, 40% unemployment. And if they don't do anything, then things just stay that way indefinitely. And so
Yeah,
they
but I
have,
mean, like the
yeah.
reality is, I'll make this as a strong statement. If they were to just focus on building themselves up and they were to dramatically reduce the violence,
Hmm.
economically they would grow. They're one of the they might be the highest per capita recipient of foreign aid in the entire world. Number one, and number two. At some point, like Israel can continue to use excuses indefinitely to fight with the Palestinian people, like
Hmm.
especially after October 7th. They've got so much like moral authority on their side now. If the Palestinians could chill for like 5 years, at some point, like the whole world is going to be like breathing down his society. Like, why the fuck do you still have these people under these conditions? There's no excuse, right? But I think the Palestinians now at this point, I think they have to fight for that moral authority because I think they've
Hmm.
fucked it up really hard in the past,
Yeah.
well,
Um,
at least 20 years. Yeah.
I mean, I would have to
Yeah,
look back through the
because
history, but like,
that's the only thing going forward that's going to change it. It's not going to be
mhm.
Israel moving first. It absolutely won't be. I wouldn't expect it to be. I don't know if any reasonable person would expect it to be. So it's not going to be Israel moving first. So the Palestinians can just fight and kick and scream forever, but it's not going to help them at all. The rest of the world cheering
Mhm.
them on doing it, I think, is incredibly selfish and stupid because it's not helping
Sure.
them at all. Um, yeah. But,
I mean,
um,
how do
real
you?
quick,
Oh yeah,
I have
please.
yeah, there's another one person that wanted to talk to me in Loner Box. He's available until like 2:20, so he's got like
Okay.
45 minutes. If you want, I can chat with him and then I can call you back afterwards if you want to talk again.
Sure. Yeah, that'll be fun.
Yeah, we can continue this conversation about you can like dig out any of the Finkelstein source or whatever. But here, I'll give you the last word on this before I hop over to that call real quick.
Okay. For sure. Yeah, I think there have been points when the Palestinians have been able to be um, pretty kind of solid and together and disciplined, and do nonviolent protests, and they've even in those cases been met with violence. I think you looked at when they came to the wall and they were just like cheering and they just had like sniper fire mowing people down.
I understand what you're saying there. I would highly dramatically suggest, or not highly dramatic, I would highly encourage looking into that because I don't think there were tons of, there were like Molotov cocktails, there were incendiary balloons, there was something, there was a lot of shit going
Okay.
on. If you're talking about the Great March of Return in 2018,
Mm-hmm.
2019 or 2017, 2018,
Yeah, 20,
yeah,
2019, yeah.
yeah, I'd recommend looking into that. I could be wrong, but, or I don't think I'm wrong, but yeah, I recommend
Well,
looking into that and see about it.
I think the the people there at the wall were not violent. I don't know if there was like violence
Hmm.
happening at other places, but those particular people weren't. They didn't have guns. I don't. I can look and see if they had Molotov cocktails, any of them, but I don't think so. And
Hmm.
those people were just getting like mowed down by sniper fire.
Hmm.
And there was something more recently where Israeli snipers were just shooting journalists. They even shot an American journalist. I don't know if you looked into this There's one particular case, I can send it to you. And then they were like shooting around her so no one could get her and bring her to safety. And she died like on the way to the hospital.
I've heard this reference before. Actually, if you could send me that though, I'd be interested in reading that.
Yeah, let me find that. Okay. Yeah,
Okay.
have a good time with the next talk. Talk to you in a
All
bit.
right.